Hi, my name is Walter Boholst. I was born in Neptune, New Jersey. I grew up there, just until I was about 10, bounced between there and West Virginia until I was about 10. Moved to Florida. And really, I consider myself growing up in Florida. Spent most of my, my middle school, primary school, middle school, high school years there, to college, then finally moved out to Los Angeles to pursue a career in filmmaking. My parents, they immigrated here in the mid-60s. So my mom is from Cebu, Mandawi to be exact, and then my dad is from Leyte, a small town called Merida. So they came over here, I think 66, and then I have two older brothers. One was born in 67, another was born in 70. I was bringing up the rear at 72. So, they're both doctors. They're part of the big brain drain, I guess. They mostly raised us. My brothers were both born in Virginia, and then I was born in New Jersey, and then, finally in around 80, we moved down to Florida, where my parents still are. So, I am a filmmaker, writer-director, and also an entertainment lawyer. In New Jersey, there actually are a decent amount of Filipinos in New Jersey, but I was very young at the time, so we would meet my parents and my aunt and uncle's Filipino friends, but that was still very young, and I really didn't embrace the whole Filipino-American experience. Not until we moved to Florida, and I was about 9 or 10 at the time. And then, we stuck out like a sore thumb, actually. There's not a lot of Filipinos in Florida, or in the South in general. So there was like a small community. I grew up in a small town anyway, so pretty much surrounded by white people. All of my friends were a lot of good old boys and rednecks. So whenever someone uses that term, it's kind of, I kind of use it as affectionately, because those are all my friends or redneck tendencies. But we did have my parents had a small group of friends in Crystal River, Florida, tiny town, probably 7 stoplights at the time. So I didn't really know what it meant to be Filipino growing up in a high school where I think probably there was maybe 6 or 7, 8 Asians in total in the entire high school. Relatively small high school, maybe 800 people. So you walk around in Florida and then you see a Filipino, and then it's kind of like, it's something special, like, hey, you're pointing over with your lips. Very rare. And then when I got to college is when I really found out what it meant to be Filipino-American. My older brothers were part of the Filipino Student Association at the University of Florida. And really at the time, it was just like a social thing. You kind of met people with a like background. But we kind of became attracted to each other like white on rice. Asian reference. No, I mean, through the Filipino Student Association, we bonded so quickly because for the first time in a lot of our lives, we were surrounded by people just like us. Ate the same food, our parents did the same things, we all had the plastic wrappers over our furniture, that kind of thing. So it was really fun, and this was my brothers were in college in the late 80s, and then I went to college in 90, so we didn't have this big internet. We didn't have the internet to, be able, where that made the world smaller. We could learn about all of these things about your Filipino heritage. We had nothing, basically. And it wasn't even books or movies. It was just your experiences. So when we got to college, it was kind of a culture shock to be surrounded by a bunch of other Filipino Americans. And it was great. It was a really big family atmosphere, and it became more about the bonds between the people. I mean, there's actually a lot of non-Filipinos in it too, because it was really about family as opposed to a Filipino student association somewhere else that might be more politically oriented, or you're doing programs for the community. We just enjoyed being around each other. And Gainesville is a college town, so your life experience is who you're with. So the organization became a family away from home from everybody. And to a lesser extent, when I went to law school in Miami, it was the same thing. They were just starting up their Filipino Student Association several years after I was a freshman at the University of Florida. So there's this big college Filipino Association movement in the early mid-90s. And it was really fascinating because in the 80s, when I first went to my first UF-FSA meeting, there was like 10 people in the basement of the student union. And then by the time I graduated, I was president of the UF-FSA. Our first meeting that year had maybe 120 people. By the time I graduated, we had maybe 250 on the phone list. And I go back years later, and we started these events, say in 1993, a big talent show, and now like 2,000 people are showing up, and all these FSAs from South Carolina and Louisiana and Georgia, they're participating. And it's amazing to see the growth of that in the last 20, 25 years, and to think, we were part of it at the beginning, when it was not, cool or anything to be Filipino. We just like being around each other. And that's kind of the Filipino spirit. It's just, it's fun, it's family, it's food, it's being friendly with each other. And there was a really an infectious attitude, both within Filipino Americans that went to the University of Florida and these other FSAs around the South. And then, it brought in non-Filipinos, and then our attitude and fun kind of went out throughout the campus and throughout the South. So it was awesome. I mean, it was some of the best years of my life. And honestly, it changed my life. A lot of Generation X were in college in the 80s, early 90s. And I think that generation, there was a lot of, when we grew up, it was kind of an analog world, So the internet started coming on. I remember, first people sending emails and stuff, 93, 94, and then the internet started exploding, 95, 96, 97. So that had a little bit, it kind of permeated through, I think, the consciousness of America, actually, is this interconnectedness, particularly with Filipino Americans. Our generation had a dearth of representation in the media and society in general, especially when you're growing up in the South and you're the only brown person and there's a bunch of white people, or Latinos for South Florida. So when we did have that exposure, probably coupled with a lot of the immigrants who immigrated to America from the 60s to probably early 70s, and they were all having kids and they were becoming college age right around that time. At least a lot of my parents' friends, a lot of our friends growing up were my parents' med school friends. So I think that whole generation had kids of college age around that time. And then as the 90s progressed and you got into Generation Y, with what I call the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, Britney Spears generation. Generation Y was almost double the size of Gen X, actually. So a lot of the immigrants who came in the 70s, their kids were coming of age into the the college age, and a lot of them were Filipino. So, and then that's obviously when the internet kind of brought the world together. You started to be experiencing all of these different images and seeing, all the different races and even sexual orientation. All of these different ways of life started getting out to the masses. So there's kind of it made the world smaller. A lot of people were able to connect, easier. And I think it was the right time both for demographics, technology, and the consciousness of the American society. To not only find out what else is out there in the world, but also find people that you affiliate with. Kind of the internet world is the niche world, so you can have a million sites just about Filipinos and Filipino Americans or whatnot. And our life as in these college student associations was kind of an extension of that. It was that niche world where you find people like yourself. especially in the South, like I said, because if, on the West Coast, I mean, there's literally millions of Filipinos, and it's almost not special at all, which is different, and it's, I don't know if it's sad, but, when you walk out of the house and you're surrounded by 99.9% white people, as opposed to in parts of LA where the entire shopping plaza is Filipino. I mean, that blew my mind. We started this thing called Deaf Talent Jam. Now it's called DTJ. We started in '93. It was basically a big talent show with all the Filipino schools coming together. And we had maybe 120 people in the audience the first time. There was 5 acts in this little campus bar. I remember going back, I don't know, maybe 10 years later or 8 years later, and it was in the biggest club in Gainesville. There must have been 1,000 people. All of these groups were on stage, and it was amazing. It was one of the greatest moments of my life. I mean, just to be melodramatic about it, because we started that. We didn't know what it would become. So there was a tremendous need for the people in our culture to be together and to celebrate together and to compete against each other and be our people with each other. And it's kind of a powerful thing to say before that, we didn't have that as a people. Our whole segment of American society, it just wasn't represented, wasn't happening, and all of a sudden it was happening. And it was just amazing, it was a beautiful thing.